Hi, I'm Paul Comiskey, Director of Socrates Workforce Solutions, and today we're going to look at knowledge management for manufacturing, service and financial industry. So before we do that, I'll just give you a very brief overview of the company which we set up 2 years ago. And a little bit about myself, and then I'm going to tell you what services we're delivering in the next 3 months, just to give you a flavour of the diversity of what we can cover. So as I said, we were a company set up approximately 2 years ago. There's 3 of us, myself, Tom Marr and James Carney. Each one of us has in excess of 30 years engineering experience in various industries and also in various countries. We're also training partners with IMR, or Irish Manufacturing Research, and that company's mission or goals encompasses knowledge sharing and informing industry focused research, enabling Ireland as a global leader in advanced manufacturing. So basically they have a research centre in Mullingar, and they do research in cobotics, manufacturing 4.0, cybersecurity, additive manufacturing, augmented reality, virtual reality, energy, IoT, and 1 or 2 other disciplines. And as part of, I suppose, that, we sit on the National Robotics Steering Committee with them. So our company, Socrates Workforce Solutions, sits on that committee, and we actually chair the education subcommittee. Current output of that subcommittee or sub-team is we've developed a detailed skills needs assessment survey which is being circulated to industry, both SMEs and multinationals. So it may go to your company or it may not. If you want a copy of it, you're more than welcome to contact me and I can send you a copy of the survey. Right now, as a company, our most popular services include robotics and industrial automation, Lean Six Sigma interventions, maintenance management, factory operations and maintenance health checks, risk analysis, specifically FMEA audits, analytical problem solving, knowledge management and knowledge audits, skills and competency audits, and then we're also doing some EMC compliance and antenna testing training with Minute. Our current projects over the next 3 months, we're doing analytical problem solving and leadership training for University of Limerick as part of an industry masters program. We're working with Intel, I think it's the end of August into September, delivering pneumatics and control systems training for some of their manufacturing technicians. I'm working with Minute on a knowledge management module for their masters program in the autumn. I'm also delivering a knowledge management workshop probably in IMR's research centre in September. Again, I'm in China for 2 months delivering semiconductor processing and maintenance management training in the University of Technology in Nanjing. Myself and James are working with Minute. They have a new anechoic chamber for EMC compliance testing, and we're delivering compliance testing training and antenna design and testing training for industry in October. I'm also currently working with a South Korean semiconductor manufacturing company, advising them on maintenance and engineering management best practice. And at the moment I've been asked by a client in this country to develop training on AI and machine learning. A little bit about myself. I have 37 years experience working both as an engineer and manager and lecturer in a combination of military, marine, academic and multinational organisations. I have extensive experience internationally. I've worked in France, the Middle East, Saudi Arabia for the Air Force, Australia, Japan, China, and also a number of states in America, including Alaska. I'm a qualified marine radio and electronics officer, and I also have a master's degree in applied physics, and I'm a Lean Six Sigma black belt. I'm currently also the engineer in charge for the 2018 Golden Globe Irish entrant for the round the world race. This is a non-stop race. using old technology, so no GPS or no modern navigation equipment on board. And the Irish entrant, Gregor McGuckin, is 30 years of age. You might be interested in looking that up. So let's talk a little bit about knowledge management. So why or what is knowledge management, right? So it's nothing new. It's basically a process of understanding the following. What does your organization know? Okay. Where is the knowledge located? So is it on a database or is it in someone's head? It's usually both. And in what form is the knowledge stored? Is it stored explicitly or tacitly? Okay. And then also, more importantly, what are the gaps, the knowledge gaps in the organization? So that really, to do that well, you need a knowledge audit. And knowledge audits, I mean, you can buy them on the internet. You know, APQI will do one. You know, they'll charge you 10,000 or something like that for it. But knowledge audits are better done within the company and designed, I suppose, in partnership with the company, because they're very specific to, I suppose, what a company is manufacturing or what a company's core business is. Also, how are we going to best transfer the knowledge to the relevant people, and who are these people? So that's part of knowledge management. And possibly lastly then, you need to assess the organization's actual know-how versus the organization's needs. So this is all around protecting IP. So the need to know. Do a certain group in the organization need to know about the new technology, or a certain chemistry or certain physics associated with the new technology, or do they not need to know? So why is knowledge management important? So it helps companies, you know, learn from past mistakes and successes. So this is all around after action reviews, A3s, you know, how previous problems were solved and so on. It exploits, or it better exploits, existing knowledge assets and redeploys them in areas where the firm stands to gain something. So it gives you technical breadth from your senior technical leaders across the company. It's very important not just to have technical depth, you also need to have, particularly your senior people, having some breadth. It promotes a long-term focus on developing competencies and skills. These are separate, okay, and I'll talk to this later. It enhances the firm's ability to innovate, so your ability to solve problems faster, do error proofing, you know, the lean concept, you know. It enhances the firm's ability to protect its key knowledge and competencies from being lost or copied. So this is all around IP protection, patents, trade secrets, etc. So I suppose in summary, the way I look at it is it's almost like a formula. As I'm a physicist or an engineer, I always like to see the maths. So I always say to people, look, it's like this. If you want to develop expertise, either as an individual or as a group of people, so that's one side of the equal sign, developing expertise. The other side of the equal sign is going to be knowledge engineering plus adaptive problem solving. So you need to have knowledge engineering, you know, actively happening within your company, and you need to have, you know, adaptive problem solving capability. So effectively what you want to do is become a learning organization. So I'll stop there, and what we'll do then is have a look at the first module, which is an introduction to knowledge management. Okay, so we're just going to look at module 1. So this is going to give a course overview and talk a little bit about the continuum of understanding. So typically when I'm delivering this training, this type of training, there's 7 modules, takes, you know, about a day, right? But it's only an overview. Then typically companies will want parts of it as part of their, I suppose, knowledge management journey. To be done in more detail. For example, they might want to do competency assessment separately, they might want to do knowledge audit separately, they might want some advice on designing a system or framework for their knowledge management, or templates for knowledge capture and so on, and we have done that with a number of multinationals actually. Anyway, back to the course. So Module 1 is just an introduction, so I've kind of given you an introduction there previously, but we'll talk to it again, and then talking about this XY plot, continuum of knowledge. So all those engineers like graphs. And then we're going to talk a little in Module 2 about knowledge management systems and frameworks. Now, the other modules cover stuff like learning styles, learning models, and the importance of knowledge sharing. Module 4 then talks to knowledge capture tools and techniques. Module 5 is very important because that goes through the whole knowledge conversion, tacit to tacit, tacit to explicit, explicit to explicit, and explicit to tacit, and why each of those are important and how to, I suppose, promote them happening, and in some cases how to stop them happening. Knowledge protection, sharing, and transfer challenges. So we do talk a lot there about IP and the importance of sharing and transferring in the right way and in a controlled fashion. And then the last module is really around the whole fifth discipline, which is systems thinking and where it fits in the learning organization. So I would like to spend, we won't cover module 7, but I would like to talk to you a little bit about the 5 disciplines and try and show you where knowledge management fits. So for module 1, at the end of this, hopefully you understand the differences between data, information and knowledge, and probably not wisdom. I certainly don't understand that bit, but I can give you some insights. Know the differences between skills, competencies and knowledge. So they're separate, right? People often confuse them. Optimum ways then to assess and improve using cleverly designed learning programs, whether it's problem-based learning, on-the-job training, proficiency, mentorship, etc. And then understand the importance of both skills and knowledge to an organization and how they need to be managed separately. So again, we talked to this earlier. What is knowledge? So just briefly, again, process of understanding what the organization knows, where the knowledge is located, how it's stored, and what the gaps are. So that's your knowledge audit. How to best transfer the knowledge to the relevant people. So that's a big challenge. Is it new knowledge? If it's new knowledge, who needs to know it first and who needs to know it last? One of the challenges there too is not to convert the knowledge from tacit to explicit too soon, because the new knowledge in its most powerful form is in its tacit form. And then why is it important? Obviously, it gives you better cadence of problem solving if you have a good knowledge management practices in place. It enhances your ability to innovate. It exploits your existing knowledge assets and redeploys them across the organization. So it helps you become, or enables you to become, a learning organization. So not all the knowledge is kept in people's heads or in small groups, whereas in the past people often said knowledge is power, so the less I tell other people, the more protected my job is. In actual fact, it's the opposite nowadays. For particularly scientists or engineers, there's so much information. It's quite common to suffer from a thing called cognitive overload, which we talked to in one of the modules. And I always say to people, the quicker you can get rid of the knowledge and disseminate it through the organization, the less stressed you will be, as an engineer or a manager or a scientist. So the actual key nowadays is get the knowledge, understand it, get rid of it. And when I mean get rid of it, I don't mean literally throw it out. It means disseminate it out to the organization, to the right people, so that the organization grows, so that you now have your head empty for the new knowledge that's coming, next month or next year. What are the challenges? I suppose, one of the challenges is finding the right mix between learning and transferring the learning, So yeah, I have to learn it, but I have to learn it in such a way that I can transfer it. So you need to learn faster. It's a thing I've called high rate learning in the past. So how do you actually improve the cadence of learning for individuals? There are actually ways to do that. You need to be able to solve problems a lot faster, and you need to implement the solutions faster. That's really key. By the way, this knowledge management is not just for engineering or manufacturing companies. It's equally, in some cases, more important for financial companies, whether they be banks or insurance companies. It's obviously also very important for service industries as well. So if we look at this XY graph, So on the y-axis, you can see they call it context, okay? So, and then on the x-axis, we have a thing called understanding, right? So if we look at data, what is data? Data is just a jumble of letters, words, numbers, with no meaning, okay? It's only when you give the data a context that it becomes information. So for example, if I say to you, if you're a digital electronics engineer, for example, and I say to you, 2, 3, 1, they're just numbers, right? But then if I say to you, give it a unit of volts, you might say, well, 2 volts, 3 volts, 1 volt. You might say, well, that's 1 volt is logic 0, 3 volts, maybe that's hitting the threshold for a logic 1. Or if it's a field effect transistor, you might say, okay, depending on whether it's N or P channel, you might say, well, that could be the threshold voltage. You know, one of those voltages could be the threshold voltage to switch on the transistor. So what you're doing there is, by having some context with the data, it becomes information, but it doesn't become knowledge, you know. It only becomes knowledge through doing and interacting with it, right? So it's only when you get a voltmeter and you measure the voltage, you know, on a TTL gate or a transistor gate or whatever, that, you know, potentially it becomes knowledge. And none of that ever becomes wisdom. Wisdom is something different. So the examples I like to give to people, the voltage one, it's a bit obscure. It's specific to, I suppose, electronics. But if you look at Morse code, for example, you know, so originally the Morse code was just dots and dashes, right? So a couple of dots here or a couple of dashes there, it doesn't mean anything, right? But when it became a code and letters became associated with it, you could then build words, all right? So now you had a context, right? So, and then it evolved into Murray code for radio teletype and so on. Again, like if you look at units, like feet and pounds, I mean, they're not related units, but foot-pound is a unit of torque, right? And it relates to Newton meters. So torque is very critical to the setting of, you know, high-performance engines, robot arms, plasma electrodes, and so on, right? So it's only when the data is given context and becomes information, and then is given an application where you actually practice, that it becomes knowledge. Solar flares, I mean, at the moment it's interesting that we're in what they call a sunspot cycle min. So we don't have any plasma activity on the sun, or very little. So the ionization in the layers in the ionosphere is very weak, you know, so that affects propagation of HF and so on. So I suppose what I'm trying to say here is, going back to this, you really want to get up that line fast, right? As both an individual and as a company. Don't worry about the wisdom bit. You need to get up to the knowledge bit fast. And fast means days or weeks, not months or years, okay? So this is high rate learning. This is what it means to a company. And it's not just for individuals, it's for the whole organization. They need to be up that curve or that line really, really fast. And the problem nowadays is, if you're not up that line fast, you're going to be left behind. Now the whole wisdom thing, there's a lot of, I suppose, views on that. I mean, in the past, people who are wise often were thought to be older, but you can be young and wise as well. It's nothing to do with emotional intelligence, that's for sure. If you look at very often people who've achieved wisdom, they typically have what they call a transformational experience, which very often is quite traumatic. Okay, so in the case of let's say the Jews in Auschwitz, okay, you know, some of the greatest violinists came from those camps, but obviously they had a fairly traumatic experience, right? And you know, they became great writers, or out of that they developed great writing and great musical skills. They obviously would have had it going in, but it was that transformation that gave them, I suppose, that unique perspective. I mean, that's one, I suppose, example. Typically throughout the courses, we do case studies and we do class discussions, right? Usually with flipboards or whatever. So one of the things I like to ask people is, share examples, of a complex project or a new technology, where you or your team had to adapt and learn quickly. What were the challenges you faced? How did you overcome those challenges? How did the learn rate of you or your team help or hinder you? Okay, so what slowed down the learning? That's typically the problem. Looking back, why didn't you learn fast? And it's nothing to do with intelligence. What was holding you and the team back from learning fast? Very often, it's not having the right experts. Very often, it's on your side not having the right expertise in chemistry, right? So if you're learning a new chemistry and you're a physicist or an engineer who has, maybe a superficial knowledge of chemistry, and then all of a sudden you're required to understand this new chemistry because it's important to the company. If you don't make an effort to actually go back to your Leaving Cert books, open up your chemistry books, and do some basic chemistry training, well, you're not at the races, and it's your problem. In other words, you're the problem. So, sometimes you actually have to look at yourself and say, it's not the company's problem, I'm the problem. The whole thing around skills versus competency versus knowledge. So, for me, in my experience, right, a skill is either manual, cognitive, or a mix of both. So typically for me, it's manual. Okay, I always say to people, well, what can you do? If they start talking and say, no, I can do this and I know about that, I say, yeah, what can you do with your two hands? So that's a skill. All right. Now, there's a certain amount of cognitive use of that skill, and typically it's a mix. The knowledge only comes from using or applying the skill over time, typically in a work environment. So it also involves social learning and mentoring. So typically you acquire the knowledge by working with a master. So the apprenticeship model, you go to your classroom, you learn the theory behind the skill. You might practice the skill in the laboratory, but it's only when you go out of the laboratory and go into the factory or into, the cabinet making workshop with the master, okay, and you work with the master that you actually start to really acquire knowledge of that skill, okay. Typically, you're solving problems at this level, and very often, particularly if you have a good mentor, you're converting tacit knowledge to explicit knowledge. So he or she is showing you, this is how, I use my hands to perform this task. Torque is a good example. So, you can set a torque with a torque wrench or a torque screwdriver, right? But a really good mechanic or a really good technician sometimes can set torque by feel. So how is that done? Well, that's a tacit skill. So if you're using an Allen key or an Allen wrench, you use, assuming you're right-handed, you only use 3 fingers in your right hand. So I know that. I don't know how I know that, but that's it. If somebody says you have 4 fingers, they're wrong, or 2 fingers, they're wrong. It's 3 fingers, and your thumb has to be one of them. So that's tacit knowledge, but a master mechanic will know that. Competency, the combination of knowledge and skill, right? So the competency is where the company starts to win. So competency is important from an economic perspective, right? It does increase productivity. It increases company metrics particularly, right? So, it'll improve your cycle time, your availability, your utilization over availability, all of those metrics, your quality, your safety even will improve if you have good competency in your workforce. It also reduces unemployment. If you have a competent workforce, they invent new jobs. So, for example, the whole thing about machine learning and AI, everyone's worried about losing their jobs. Well, if you have a highly competent workforce, they will invent new jobs. I'd like to talk through this. It's a little bit involved, but there is an analytical approach to doing a competency assessment. Competency assessments are difficult to design, and they can be quite complex Typically, they should be done at 3 levels. So a core level, an advanced level, and a master level, and they're done by discipline. So, for example, if you want to do a competency assessment, this is probably the one I'll show you in analytical problem solving. You need to look at the skills required for analytical problem solving at the core level, at the advanced level, and at the master level. And then you also need to look at how am I going to build competency from each of those skills, and you have to suggest ways of doing that. And then lastly, you have to say, how am I going to measure? And the measure is done at both the individual level and at the company level. So an individual should be able to see their skill and competency improve. So let's say they score a 1 at a certain skill, and they want to improve to a 3 or a 4. Well, they should be able to score themselves up based on what they do to improve that skill. But more importantly for the company, if the company has 10 people or 20 people in the company who are improving their skills at a core level in analytical problem solving, and they have 2 people who are improving their skills in analytical problem solving at a master level, how should that reflect in the company's metrics? So to me, you should be able to measure that, and in fact you can measure it. I've measured it in the past. You should see equipment change orders being closed faster. You should see the rate of problem solving. You can measure that improve. You may actually see your availability, you should see your availability improve and so on. So you should be able to tie the competency to a key metric for the company. So what I'll do is I'll come back to this in a minute because I need to open this up in an Excel format probably. But just, I suppose, in summary then, developing expertise involves knowledge engineering, which is what we're talking about today, but most importantly, and as importantly, adaptive problem solving, right? So your problem solving, you can use different methodologies. You can use your analytical problem solving. You can use inventive thinking, that's TRIZ. You can use critical thinking techniques as well. So whatever you're using, you need to have a problem solving framework that's adaptive, and then you need to have knowledge engineering embedded and a framework and system embedded in the company, and that will allow you as a company to develop your expertise. So I'm just going to show you here how to do a competency assessment, or one way of doing it. So I always say to people, look, don't be doing competency assessments annoying your workers, basically, unless you're doing the assessment on the right skills for them and the right skills for the company. So the first thing you need to do before you do any competency assessment is you need to sit down with the senior management team, including, if it's an engineering company, including some of the senior engineers. And you need to say to them, look, tell me, okay, as the customer, right? So this is the voice of the customer, VOC. In number 1, what are your requirements as a company? And score them 1 to 10. Give us the 10 things that are important to you as a company. So for example, I've just randomly given 10 things that are important to a lot of companies. So Lean Six Sigma methodology, knowledge management, technical leadership, high performance maintenance, safety, cost, output, cycle time, and so on. I'd say to them, whichever is the most important, give it the higher score. So in this example, safety has been given a score of 10, which I think is quite a good thing. The next most important thing to this company, this fictitious company, is cost. It's given a score of 9. And the least important thing, for some reason, is high performance maintenance. Okay, so that's fine. Okay, so that's a 1. And then you say, you then tell them, look, as a Socrates Workforce Solutions, or as somebody else, typically it's not us, it might be IMR, or it might be ourselves and somebody else. These are the inputs we can provide you, which we think will improve one of your important requirements. Okay, so for example, Six Sigma tools and application, manufacturing science, supply chain management, managing projects, maintenance management, lean methodology, statistics, skills metrics, knowledge management, blah blah, whatever. So you just list them down there, right? And what you do then is, with the engineering team, you basically score them against each other. So you say, well, if you told me that safety was the most important thing to you, okay, or cost, for example, or output. Okay, so if you look at safety was a 10, cost was a 9, and output or cycle time was a 5. Okay, so they're pretty important to the company, and problem solving was a 7. So how relevant is maintenance management and HPM to those? Well, I would say to problem solving, it's a relevance on a scale of 1 to 5. It's only a relevance of 3. Maintenance management and HPM actually would have a very high relevance to safety. So it would be a 4 or a 5 to safety, and it would have an even higher relevance to output or cycle time. So that would be a 5. Do you follow? And then what you do is you multiply basically the top column or the top row, which is the customer outputs, against the relevant inputs that you can provide, and you come out in this example for a score of 200 in relation to maintenance management and HPM. So that means that you're suggesting to that company, typically if the score is above 175 or thereabouts, it suggests that that might be a competency that they need to look at for their company, right? So in this case, we're saying to the company, maintenance management and HPM is an important competency for you or your employees, based on your requirements as a company. Whereas team development scored 172, you kind of say, well, yeah, it's a little bit important, but it's not something you need to focus on. And Six Sigma tools and applications, well, that scored 179. It may be important, it's above 175, but let's see what the other scores showed. And based on that, then you say to them, well, you should now do a competency audit of your organization for maintenance management and HPM, or whatever the 5 big hitters are, and then you design the competency assessment for those. There's no point doing competency assessments for skills that aren't going to basically affect the company metrics or what's important to the company on the output side. And when you've aligned with the senior management team, these are the 5 competencies, and typically it's 5 that we're going to focus on as a company. Then you do the competency assessment. And it's only after, and I'll show you competency assessment in a minute, it's only after you do the competency assessment that you sit with the company and say, well, okay, so this is where your employees score as core, advanced and masters on this particular these 5 competencies. You then actually have to have a heart-to-heart and say to them, do you really think that training is going to improve this? The answer usually is no. Okay, so you have to help them understand why training is only part of the answer, and what else they need to provide to improve those competencies. And certainly that's something we've helped companies with before. Training is certainly part of it, but it's the smallest part by far. So if you give me a moment, I'll open up a competency assessment for problem solving, just to show you the level of depth that's required for these. We're going to look at a competency assessment now for problem solving. So this is an example of one I've used in the past for problem solving. So it's typically analytical problem solving we're talking about here. So I will tell the company, so we've decided we're going to assess a number of your engineers, or maybe all of your engineers or technicians, for the skill of analytical problem solving. The important thing is we're going to assess them at core, advanced and master, right? Not everyone is going to be a master, okay? In fact, it's quite common not to have any masters in problem solving in a company. And you may only have 20% at advanced, and you might only have 30 or 40% at core. So you have to, as a company, that's a philosophical discussion they have to have before you do this assessment. They may decide they only want to assess some of their senior engineers, typically, because they're nervous about the results that they may get. It's a self-assessment. It's important to realize that people actually, particularly Europeans and most particularly Irish people tend to score themselves very low on these. They tend to underscore themselves. So it's a self-assessment, and then it's a conversation with their manager, and then it's a roll-up. It's best to roll up the figures from a company perspective, not by individual, but as a group. So it's better to know this is where the company is for core analytical problem solving. This is where it is for advanced analytical problem solving as a score, and this is where we are at master level. Okay, so that they get a feel for what it's like within the total organization. So what would be a core problem solving skill, whether it be cognitive or task related? So understanding the analytical problem solving framework, demonstrating your knowledge on tactical project and strategic issues. Okay, another skill might be using the analytical problem solving framework to solve discrete equipment problems. Okay, so that's specific hard downs on a piece of equipment. Understanding task force expectations, business processes, including expectations and standards relating to minutes, documents, AR documents, after action reviews, etc. That would be another skill. Completing all improvement updates in a timely manner, root cause fixes and problem learning, sharings, AR closure, spec updates, equipment upgrades, etc. So they're all specific skills. So the engineer will score themselves, from 1 to 5, 1 being a low score, 5 being a high score. And then you suggest to them, well, if you want to increase that skill and increase it so that you gain knowledge in that skill, so that eventually you get competency, then you have to do, or we suggest that you do these applications, right? So for example, you're a task force team member, you demonstrate an understanding of analytical problem solving in solving tactical equipment issues, etc., etc. You're involved in equipment escalations for discrete equipment issues. You prioritize work with area teams and coordinate resources to meet all CSIs and roadmap items for equipment or process, so and so on. Now, this would be very specific to the company. So a competency assessment, while this is a generic one actually, but while it may be generic, you would need to adjust this for the industry or for the business that the company is actually involved in. And then the last bit is the hard bit. So how do you measure the competency at individual level and at factory level? So column F is how I measure it at individual level. So if the individual is core at problem solving, they're able to actively participate in and co-lead a minimum of 2 task forces, team-led efforts in their area, business group, and participate in a minimum of 3 machine equipment SWATs in their area. Okay. And then how do you measure it at factory level? Well, that's where you actually have to sit with the company and agree, typically with their statisticians or the production managers, how they're actually going to measure the improvement in competency at core level. And you do this, this is quite long, this one, there's a lot more core skills in this, and then obviously you do it at advanced level, and then you do it at master level. And that would be a competency assessment for one discipline. So you might do one of these for problem solving, you might do one of these for leadership, you might do one of these for Lean Six Sigma, you might do one of these for data extraction and analysis, statistical analysis. So you typically would do 5 of these for a company across the 5 disciplines that are important to them from a business perspective. So it does take a lot of time. It can be quite worthwhile. Companies actually do it, which is interesting. Particularly the multinationals would spend a lot of time focused in on this because they feel it's key to their business, particularly as their new technologies come on board, and they have to, I suppose, in generic terms, upskill their workforce, or they have to get better at doing certain tasks. Okay, so we're going to look at the second module now, which is knowledge management systems and frameworks. So this is pretty logical stuff. people usually connect pretty fast with this. So understand, at the end of this, you'll be able to understand how your organization should approach knowledge management implementation and the culture change required. Understand basic system requirements, which are pretty straightforward, and then review some frameworks. They're pretty much the ones I've used in the past, and learn how they may be applied. Okay. Some terminology. So the knowledge management organization structure. So this is like the hierarchy and how it organizes the knowledge management team. I'll give you and the metrics and so associated with that. I'll give you a kind of a chart to show you that in a minute. The culture is very important. So how the culture of the organization will support the philosophy, the learning org, the knowledge sharing, and so on. In the past, I found in companies I've worked with, and also one or two companies I've worked externally with, two companies on this, both in Ireland. One in Ireland and one in America. If the senior management team aren't on board with this, you're wasting your time. And not only if the senior management team aren't on board with it, if the most senior person in the company, whether that be the director of the company, the plant manager, whatever, if they're not on board, it's not going to work. Doesn't matter how much money you spend with systems and platforms and consultants and training and all the rest, it'll just all fall apart. The knowledge management system platform, so this is the software platform that stores, shares and supports the knowledge library, very important part of the system. Content management, so that's how do you store the knowledge if you're storing it in an asset form. So what templates are you using? How is the workflow management for the storing of the templates used, and so on. And then the document management, indexing, search and retrieval, security, administration, and so on. I'm sorry about this, it's hard to read, but really what you have here is you come up with a KM, in relation to the organization, you map out the way the knowledge management framework is going to fit into the organization. So to the left you have your senior management leadership team, and they're basically on board, and they provide a sponsor to the knowledge management owner, right? So in the past, for example, I was the knowledge management owner for Intel in Leaslip. So that person has to have a direct connection via sponsor to the senior management team. That's the best way to do it. And then you have your department managers, various departments and so on. And then underneath that, then you'll build a knowledge management system. You'll have your knowledge management system alignment and implementation. Okay, so then you have your individual learning plans, competency development and measures. You'll have your KM matrix, business metrics, availability, equipment change orders, closure, etc. Right. So you're setting out the framework here. Then you have your KM system and framework. What sharing forums are you going to use? Whether it's community of practice, lunchtime talks, whatever. And then who are your subject area experts? And then you have to have also a core team, right? So you have an owner and a core team. And then really the core team are going to align on what knowledge capture and transfer tools are going to be used, how we're going to train people on the system. We need to give some training always on cognitive learning techniques, so how do you learn? What is the science of learning? When people understand how they learn, most people don't actually, then they're able to understand how to learn faster and better. And then you need to have some sort of, depending on what platform, if you've alfresco platform or whatever, you need to have an automation or a programming expert who's has expertise in the platform's software and so on. I'm not going to talk to these because they're all software stuff, which doesn't really interest me. Alfresco is the main one that's used in Europe. The two most common ones I've seen are Alfresco and SharePoint. The Alfresco is used by the EU. It's used by British, the police in England. It's used by the army and so on. SharePoint is cheaper. It's used a lot by SMEs. Most of the multinationals will tend to use Alfresco. It's expensive. I mean, there is an open source version of it, but they will buy uh, they'll buy the license to use the expensive version. It's a very secure system. There are other systems. The one I use, we pay monthly for it, is Knowledge Owl. It's not too expensive and it's quite good. And I'm not worried about security. I only use it for training. So typically a company wouldn't necessarily buy Knowledge Owl because they might be concerned about security. But for me, the security is fine, and it's quite a novel system. It's quite good. There's open source systems. I've listed some of them there. I've never used any of them. So considerations, requirements, size. So can it store large file sizes, including video? That's a big consideration. So video is widely used nowadays for learning. Speed, is it faster? Is it fast? Can it be accessed overseas? The overseas thing is a big deal, by the way. So if you're, particularly for multinationals, a lot of the data will be stored in America. You need to have fast access via the satellite links. A lot of the time it doesn't work fast enough, so that's a huge consideration. File types, does it support all file types? Does it support all video types? More importantly, from an engineering perspective, will it work with the statistical files and other statistical database software files that you will have, JMP, SQL, Pathfinder and so on? They can be problematic with some of the platforms. Are you able to create logical and detailed indexes? Is it secure? That's the big deal. Most of them have relatively good security, but they will not be secure enough for some companies, to be quite honest with you. So if that's the case, companies typically have multiple firewalls, and their automation systems are usually at the highest level of security, and they're behind the last firewall, and very often the knowledge management system will not work on the other side of that firewall. Almost always it will not work. So it actually means that you can access all the stuff from outside the factory in the offices. As soon as you go into the factory, you won't be able to access half it. And that's quite typical. It's quite common. Now, some companies don't mind. I mean, they basically say, well, sure, if they want to access, they can go outside of the factory, and in a lot of the cases that's fine. Some cases it's not. Is it very searchable? What's the user interface like? That's a big deal, so the whole tablet, mobile phone, if it's allowed in the factory, they're usually not, but what is the user interface like for the user? What's the internal security like within groups? So can you set up groups so that different groups can't see the knowledge from other groups? Does it allow users to give feedback? Does it have encryption? It needs to have encryption. Can you do statistical DEA on the databases? So can you actually run stats on how the knowledge is being accessed, used, and shared in some cases, right? So as an organization, that's really important, because that's part of understanding how the knowledge is actually disseminating through the organization. Can you edit and track changes? If you have some changes that you want to make to documents in the knowledge base, and then also can you tag content with metadata? So in relation to knowledge management, so this previous bit here was to do with the system. So the system is the platform and the enterprise software that's going to be used, whether it's alfresco, SharePoint, Knowledge Owl, or whatever system that's going to be used. And then here we're talking about the framework. So the framework, that's one framework. I'm not going to talk to that. That's a common model that used to be used by a lot of companies in the past. But this is a model I've been using recently. So I basically say to companies, look, you basically have 5 parts to this journey. You're going to prepare. Okay, you're going to capture the knowledge. You're going to discuss the knowledge within the organization. You're going to share it. Okay, and then you're going to perform as a company. and it's split into 3 phases. So phase 1 is the prepare, capture, and discuss. Phase 2 is the sharing, and phase 3 is the performing. And obviously they overlap. Okay, so preparing would involve, aligning with your senior management team, having your strategy, having your owners, designing the system, and having a detailed roadmap. Capture then is, how are we going to capture the knowledge, either the new knowledge or the knowledge that we think we already have captured. This is the knowledge audit stuff, but we don't know where it is. So ID the knowledge experts, the knowledge gaps, and then begin knowledge capture and populate your templates. Then discuss. So that's reflecting on the learning, validating the knowledge with experts, making sure that the knowledge that has been captured in the past or is being captured now is correct. There's nothing worse than having it documented incorrectly. What sharing forums and learning forums are we going to have within the organisation? How are we going to share the knowledge? And to that point, then share and teach. You need to have a mentorship program, right? So a big part of knowledge sharing is having sharing forums which are open, having sharing forums which are within teams, and then having mentorship programs which basically allow people to actually develop a skill into knowledge. Then the whole on-the-job proficiency plans, proficiency plans, measurement, competency assessment and building. So how do we assess competency? That's all the competency assessment stuff. And how do we build competency? And then perform, demonstrate technical capability, certification, measure success then using knowledge management metrics, whether it's cycle time, problem solving cadence, availability, etc. So how do we tie the company's key business metrics to our knowledge management program and growth? I think it's important too to maybe say to people, very often when companies look at this, they go, this is just too big, we can't do all of this. It's not. All you have to do is you just box off the knowledge that you want, the knowledge you already have within the company that you want to capture. There's no point in capturing it all. Just say, we want to see what were the top 200 problems that we had as a company in the last 5 years. Let's just capture that. And that's very doable. Or you say to them, what is the new technology that you're going to transfer from China or from Japan or from America, whatever? Don't worry about the past knowledge. Let's just focus on the new knowledge. Let's build a system to capture that. Do you follow? You can't do it all. You have to bound it with the senior management team. So you have to do what's important and what's doable. And you need to do something that could be done in a year, 6 months to a year. That would be my approach. There's one lane that's probably missing there, and I didn't deliberately leave it out, but I do discuss it with the team. You need to standardize, right? So really there should be 6 lanes there: prepare, capture, discuss, standardize, share and perform. Do you follow? So there has to be some standardization across department. This is the Lean Six Sigma philosophy, Don't have everyone doing it a different way. So if you're going to share, what's the standard for sharing? And everyone should use that standard. If you're going to capture knowledge, what's the standard for capturing knowledge? And everyone should use the same standard. This is one I used recently in a company. It's kind of similar. Prepare, learn, standardize, share and win. But you can see we kind of split it into more specific parts in the roadmap. Now you'd have a roadmap built in parallel with this, which would have dates and timings and interventions on it, right? So it's not kind of haphazard. This was a 6-month deal. So we basically had to this was a lot of stuff to get done in 6 months. So you can see over to the far right, under the share and win, you're transferring knowledge face to face, you're enabling a mentorship culture, you've designed new learning forums, you're educating the organisation on knowledge management. It started off as a pilot, you're proliferating the pilot, and then you're measuring success. People are having a career best experience, the site technical leadership is growing, and you're becoming a learning organisation. And sometimes when people look at that, whether it's a management team or employees, if you put that up in front of them, they're going, oh, this is just a whole lot of things we have to do. Which, honestly, if I seen that, I'd say the exact same thing. You know, they're kind of saying, reflect on learning. What the hell does that mean? Training on chosen platform. They're straight away, they're saying, I don't want to do that. They don't even know what the platform is. Do you follow? So you have to kind of give them a system diagram sometimes. Sometimes you have to say, well, look, don't think of it that way. Think of it like, this is the organization we have now, right? So here's the structure. There's all the bosses up on top, right? Down here, we've got individual contributors or technical experts. This is not a particular organization. This could be any organization, right? We have a strong management team. We have collaboration, we have empowerment, and we have coaching, right? So if that's what we have, hopefully that's what most companies have, something like that. That's going to support the learning organization, which is basically building deep competency within the organization, using knowledge management best practice so that we develop your careers. And by doing all of that, we're enabling our company's business, which is leading, performing, developing, right? So this is the company business. The leading bit is from the management team, the values of the company, the culture of the company, the strategy, the roadmap for the company for the next year or 5 years. The performing is solving problems fast, decision making, prioritizing, becoming best in class. Developing then is sharing, innovating, collaborating, communicating. And if we do all of that, we're going to get high performing teams, world-class business metrics, and we're going to be skilled for the future, which is kind of your career development. And by doing that, you're developing the individual and team. And basically you say to them, that's the system that you're working in this company. And we're only talking to you about knowledge management best practice, but we're showing you where it all fits in. It's going to help you. It's going to help the business, and it's going to help your career development. Because for you, we say to you, knowledge management, you say, yeah, more stuff to do. Don't want to know about it. But if we say to you, knowledge management, yeah, it's more stuff to do, but it's the right stuff to do. And guess what? You're going to be doing a competency assessment on problem solving. And guess what? When you come back to me and say, I want to be a master problem solving, we're going to support you doing that. And this is how we're going to do it. So everybody wins out of it. I'm just going to wrap up now with, we're not going to cover all of Module 7. I'm just going to wrap up with maybe one foil, or maybe it's two foils, just to talk about a learning organisation and just to show you where knowledge management fits in to that, to a good learning organisation. So probably this is the best of the foils, right, to summarise it, right? So Peter Senge came up with this term, the fifth discipline, but it's not really that new. So the concepts are interesting though. So to build and enable a learning organisation, which is what all companies really want to do, because that gives them their edge over the competition, is to do these three things. So you want to foster aspiration within your employees, right? And to do that, you have to allow them use personal, very often technical mastery, and create a shared vision, right? So in an engineering-led company, which that would be where most of the companies I would work with or have worked with in the past, to do that, you need to have technical depth, you need to communicate skill, you need to have leadership, okay? So that's technical leadership, individual leadership, and you need to have good coaching and mentoring, okay? So they're the first two disciplines then, technical or personal mastery and being able to create a shared vision. And then also you need to be able to develop effective conversation. So to do that, you need to build shared mental models and promote dialogue. So this is all down to this is where the knowledge piece is, right? So the whole thing about building mental models, right? And we do have a section on that in the course. So if you're able to, this is the way most people learn. They use mental modeling, even though sometimes they're not aware that they're doing it. So it's how they use their I was going to say short-term memory, it's incorrect. Their working memory and their long-term memory. So basically how they encode and decode between the two. and use prior knowledge to connect with new knowledge to build strong mental models. So you've your mental modeling, you've your knowledge capture and knowledge conversion, you've your teach back techniques, you've your active reflection, critical thinking and questioning. So the knowledge management piece fits there, right? So if you have good knowledge management systems and frameworks and structures and culture supported by, competency, sharing forums, having people trained in most cases how to reflect, how to do critical thinking and questioning well, you actually do have to train people to do that, right? So how do you do that? And then the last piece, okay, the fifth discipline is systems thinking. So how do we understand complexity? And systems diagrams or system thinking is one of the ways you can do that. So that's made up of a combination of, systems thinking tools and techniques. They can be taught. In fact, I deliver a lot of training on that. Analytical problem solving, again, that can be taught. When I say it can be taught, I mean you can't be taught how to do it, but you can be given frameworks to use to promote it. And then inventive thinking, if companies decide that they want to use TRIZ, for inventive thinking. So that's the fifth discipline, if you like. So again, in summary, a true learning organization is going to have 5 disciplines promoted and enabled within the organization: technical mastery, shared vision amongst the workers, the ability by those workers to build shared mental models and to promote dialogue amongst themselves, to build that knowledge sharing culture. And then the last piece, sometimes the more difficult piece then, is using systems thinking and other thinking techniques, to improve the understanding of what's around them and to solve problems faster. So I hope this has been useful. Again, it's only a snippet, I suppose, of some of the training that we can give on knowledge management. And if it is of interest to you and you'd like to contact me further to discuss this or any other skills training that we could do for you, my details are on the presentation. But again, it's Paul Comiskey, Socrates Workforce Solutions. Thank you.